there's no announcement these days. So I can see the live. So I'm going to assume we're live. No. We are live. All right, there we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to AMA number 41, our third HoloFuel Special. It's the 5th of August, and today we have Mary Camacho, Executive Director, and myself, David Atkinson, Commercial Director. So before we jump into Mary's update, some brief announcements. So firstly, I hope you all enjoyed the mutual credit article that came out this week. It was a fantastic read. If you didn't catch it, you can go to all of our various social channels and check the link, or go to the website, holochain.org. An update that the Dev Camp 7 is going fantastically. There are about 70 developers at the moment getting deep into Holochain. As a reminder, the Dev Camp is completely community organized and run, and also each Dev Camp is run by a different set of community organizers. So apparently this team is especially good. Thank you for everyone with your ongoing questions about HoloFuel. For all of you who've been sending the questions in either during the AMAs or in between. And for those of you who have provided feedback for these HoloFuel AMAs, absolutely fantastic. And a huge thank you to everyone who's contributing to organising and running the dev camps, and those who are giving their time and efforts in growing our various communities. For those of you who are watching this and would like to get more involved, please visit our forums, forum.holochain.org. I'm sure the link will be in the chat. Sign up and to one of the virtual hackalongs, or just start building hApps. They haven't been providing, the updates have been a little bit slower this week. So I'm going to hand over to Mary now to give us an update on the latest release before we jump into the HoloFuel questions.
Great, I'll unmute myself then. So yeah, so I actually said we would be doing fewer announcements as we were getting ready to get this release out the door. There just wasn't a lot to be communicating because we shared a lot about the feedback we are getting from tests last week through, with the 50, I think it was 57 people that we had on the staging test that we were just doing for pre-release. So we announced, I think over the weekend is when I put that in. I've been traveling, and a little discombobulated about what day is what. But anyway, I think it was over the weekend that we did our last update that said we're getting ready to do the next enhancements release for HoloFuel. And what this is just really taking all that feedback and doing some priority critical things immediately so that we can make this workable for everybody. And we're going through, we are deploying that right now. It took us an extra day or so to kind of cross the T's, dot the I's, so to speak, and get that deploy ready. But it's going out today, and I was just working on it before we came into this call. And we'll be reaching out to all of our testers in that staging community, that pre-release community, just to get in there and start testing soon. But we'll be sending out messaging about that because we want to make sure that everybody has the right information about how to get started on that. So look for messages out there if you're one of those pre-release testers. And for the rest of you, I'll talk a little bit about what's in that, just to kind of give a sense of an update. We learned so much in the previous 2 weeks. And so some of these things are really just to sort of fix the, when you're testing software, what do people do intuitively? You don't know with something new, you don't know how it is that they're going to receive it, what they're going to do, what buttons they're going to click on, which things they're going to go, what do I do now? And so we got to observe a lot of that. And it was kind of great to see when they would pause and when they were confused. They wouldn't necessarily even tell you these things, but because we were doing screen shares with people, we were able to see, oh, the mouse is going up and down and side to side looking for what to do next. And so things like that. So we deleted took out some of the options basically that were less than necessary. We removed some buttons, we fixed some scrolling. We did a couple of things that are really, really significant. One of them was, and this was probably the most important thing about the entire test that we did, was that after a week and a half or so, a few, not all, but a few of our testers really started to encounter some problems where things just weren't syncing up quite right. And we knew that there was a possibility of something. And I think I talked about this in one of the updates in the last week. But it's super important because, you know, we had been working on kind of getting down to this conductor SIM2H consistency, and we thought it was possible that there was one thing that was not quite right, but we couldn't reproduce it. And what was so fantastic about this test is that we were able to have enough people doing enough transactions over and over and over and over and over until we've got some folks hitting an error that they couldn't quite figure out. It showed up in a lot of different ways. I mean, there were a bunch of different kind of follow-on issues that it created. But we were able to get into that and find the conductor mismatch error. So we've made a major fix on that. And that's really, really exciting. So this test that we're doing right now, that we're getting started on right now, it's important that we get all of those nodes back doing all of these sorts of things so that we can make sure that we don't have that same thing happening. I mean, so we make sure that fix is really solving the problem, and so that we can see those go more consistently. But like I said, there's a few other things. This isn't the be all end all. This is not where HoloFuel will be when we get to beta. I think I said that on the last AMA. I'm going to say it again. In the intention of testing HoloFuel at this stage is to test transactions, is to test the conductor, is to test the sort of ways that people are going to use it so that that can inform our final UIs. We learned a ton from folks. We took a lot of feedback in that's actually going to have us be able to present on the screen what people really are looking for, what's missing. And in some of these ways, you can say, well, wouldn't you know that? You can go look at it. But what was fascinating is that some people wanted HoloFuel to look like their bank accounts. Some people wanted HoloFuel to look like crypto. Some people wanted HoloFuel to look like Venmo. Some people wanted, I mean, and you could hear it in their assumptions and in their questions and in their feedback that they were thinking about all these different things. But the thing is it's not those things. HoloFuel isn't those things, and it can't be all of them, but it needs to have and reflect aspects of some of them. And so really getting that sort of, what do people think about it, and what do they expect to see, and what do they want to see, is really important. This is going to become even more important because when we move into testing HoloFuel for hosts, once we have some of the host specific features in, like redemption, we'll get another version of that. And this is true with a lot of the different features that are going to be coming out over the course of the coming months. But anyway, I could go on with the changelog items, but I don't think that's necessary. We'll be posting that pretty soon. We're going to let the test get started with testers before we make other public announcements about everything. And so look for more in the next day or two.
Super. Thank you so much, Mary. And just listening to what you're saying, sounds like it's this deployment will be with this group of community testers for a week or a couple of weeks.
Probably for a week at least. I mean, we'll know where things are, how quickly people get on to the test, and so we know what we need to leave it for enough time for a lot of transactions to be hitting, and then to have more people join. Because one of the things that we saw is that the way that we were able to see certain issues is that 50 or so people were already in the test, and then another 7 people joined the test later after hundreds of transactions were already in the network. And that's a scenario that's always going to be the case. So being able to repeat that as a field test a few times when we're putting out new functionality or fixes, it's super important.
Super, thank you so much. All right, so on to the HoloFuel questions. So the first question comes from the green paper, which says one party initiates the transaction, leaving blank the fields the counterparty must complete. So if this has to be a manual process, wouldn't it entirely defeat the purpose of having fast transactions? Can it be automated? And if it can't, how will exchanges interact if they manually need to countersign transactions?
I know I talked a little bit about some of the automation last week, or feels like every week we're doing AMAs on HoloFuel. But it is true for a basic transaction between peers. I'm just going to go send my buddy 200 HoloFuel. Yes, I have to send it manually. They have to go in and they have to approve and to receive it, to accept it, and that is straightforward. But a lot of these processes, the rules of these processes can be automated based on different validation rules that are set up in the DNA of any currency app. I mean, this is going to be true for not just HoloFuel, but other currencies built on Holochain. In this case of HoloFuel in particular, the intention is hosting. So a host is going to configure in their hosting app settings. They'll set up how something, and basically they'll set it up to automate invoices to be sent from the host application in an automatic way. So they can there's a couple of different configuration points that they will have about that. And in HoloFuel terms, an invoice for hosting is the same thing as that request for payment that people are testing right now. What it does is a request provides pre-approval to the other peer, to the counterparty in your transaction, for them to send and have and you receive automatically and accept automatically. So, I mean, if you think about it, there's a lot of interesting dynamics going on in a typical crypto payment, right? There's just the person who sent. It's always just a send. There isn't a request for crypto that's out there typically. I mean, but if you think more like, and this is why I was bringing up how people were thinking about it, like PayPal or bank accounts or all those different things, right? In PayPal, you can send an invoice to somebody and request somebody to pay you. And this is similar. In HoloFuel, you can send a request, and that's what an invoice essentially is. And it's a request for payment. And with that request is an automatic approval for that. When you receive it, it comes through and gets automatically posted, and completes the transaction. So the thing is app publishers also will be able to configure their side of the hosting app, which will allow for automatic payment of hosting invoices that meet certain threshold criteria or certain validation rules. So it's an either or. They get to say how they want it to go. I mean, imagine if you were in PayPal, for example, and somebody is sending you an invoice from one PayPal to another PayPal to kind of try to use something people might recognize. You can receive that invoice in your PayPal, but typically you would have to go in and say, yes, pay it. But what if you could actually tell PayPal or whatever that the app is, that, if it's under $10, just pay it if it comes in, because I trust that that's a good one. Or if it's under $10 and it's from somebody who's in my network or somebody who's connected to me, then pay it, or whatever else the rules might be. That's the kind of is. But, I don't think that requiring acceptance of a financial transaction at all defeats the purpose of a fast transaction. I mean, I care that I have to pay a lot of money and it takes a whole lot of time to send an international wire transfer, right? And I'd like it to be faster. I'd like it to be cheaper. But today, banks are acting like a babysitter for you, essentially, because they're deciding if it's okay for you to receive money into your bank account when a wire transfer comes in. And the thing is with HoloFuel, this puts the agency in your hands. There's some other options, right? ACH, they've set up ways for you as the owner of a bank account for you to say yes, always say yes to certain kinds of transactions. Like in the US, they use ACH. I think in Europe, you've got faster payments and things like that. But even those can be stopped. I mean, any of those can be stopped by the bank. This with HoloFuel, it's you that's in charge. You get to say what gets to be accepted, what gets to be denied. Some of it can be automated, but at the end of the day, you're the only one that gets to say.
Okay, super, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I had the experience yesterday of watching somebody buy flights in Nigeria through my wife's credit card, watching it live in her bank account. So, and I mean, anyone who's had those kind of experiences knows it's a pretty strange thing to be watching, to be powerless over your account and your money, and just watching other people be able to transact in there. And the only thing you can do is call a third party and say, hey, please stop this person acting in this way on my account, probably because, yeah, credit card was entered into a website somewhere and hacked. But anyway, digress a little bit, because I think there's definitely, yeah, fantastic to hear that. And I think that really, I don't know, Mary, the way, and if you can't answer this, just let's send me to the next question. But I think there's a kind of implicit in this question is people are still getting their heads around, I think, two things. One is this, exactly how the counterparty signature can be configured and the various permutations and combinations. I think we're still scratching around, because can it be automated? I think, and one of the things I'm recognizing is we're describing this possibility because we're describing this functionality because it gives so many new possibilities of how to transact and where people are empowered. But I think there's also these questions of well, what if you just want it to be like today? In a way, what if you want to just do the address and you just want to do a super fast, super large transaction? And so I think we don't need to touch on it now, but I think over the course of when the HoloFuel app is building more functionality, maybe some of the people who are asking these questions can move into the next, into the larger wave of testing and start testing it out and giving feedback, and we can get deeper into these kind of questions, because my sense is that they're going to come over the next few months anyway.
Yeah, the thing about this approval or acceptance and how that may be different, I just really, I do think that the design of HoloFuel is unique with this, and this particular feature functionality, and really it's functionality at the Holochain level as much as it is at the HoloFuel level, is actually very much lined up with what I'm saying is needed for regulatory for currencies anyway. We do it in a different way than some, right? Or this is doing it in a different way. But the idea that you can send money, large amounts of currency or money or whatever, to another person, but not really know who's on the other side of that hash or that address or that public key, that's disappearing pretty fast. I mean, I know a lot of the community really loves that aspect of crypto, and has loved that aspect of crypto, but the regulatory and environment that we are in still is kind of pushing back against that. And there's international agreements. I'm probably gonna say it wrong because I say words wrong, but they're saying it's why you have KYC, why KYC is required by two sides of a bank, and why you have to say who you're sending it to when you're sending a large transaction through standard banking and all that other stuff. These things little by little are being imposed onto the crypto community in different ways, and different people are solving it with different types of solutions, just like all of blockchain and all the different projects and protocols are trying to solve different aspects in different ways, right? That's really what innovation does. But Holochain is solving for this particular sort of want by these agencies in a way that says, well, if somebody has to accept it and you send it to them and you have their information in terms of their ID, and they have to be ID'd on there as well, and they have to say yes. Well, that they're party to something that they said yes to. That's huge. And anyway, I'm going to stop there. I don't know if I'm answering your question anymore. You can see.
All right, that's great. Yeah, yeah. I just had one of the kids jump in. No, that's fine. I think I'm going to pause there. For those of you who really want to keep going, drilling into this issue, especially when it becomes large transactions between, say, a human and an entity like an exchange, and think you really want to learn more about this, please come with the specific questions. Make sure you get them in early. Like, just if you're watching now or watching on replay, just have a think about it. Ask us a specific question, and we'll make sure we'll dig deeper into this issue. But I think we keep moving. All right, so next question then. It was briefly touched on regarding hosts setting prices for hosting and that flowing into HoloFuel. But there was no mention about the anti-volatility mechanisms in place in the HoloFuel algorithm. So can you tell us more about those?
I'm going to kind of step back because there's something here that I think is not obvious in the question, which is that we're talking about the reserve. We're talking about a reserve for HoloFuel and another currency. And first of all, reserves aren't normal, and I don't think they're a normal function in most other crypto projects. But the reserve is what connects the HoloFuel supply to hosts. Remember, HoloFuel, this currency, it's all about Holo. It represents hosting power, or more specifically, even credits for hosting, right? And that's that intention with the reserve being a place that we can receive funds in from one currency into and hold them for our hosts, and then what that does is that creates two parts of a transaction in HoloFuel, right? It creates a debit, so the reserve account of HoloFuel goes into debt, and then the person purchasing their HoloFuel account gets a credit. So we're still at zero because HoloFuel is always, every transaction is a zero sum transaction. But that means we have HoloFuel, a positive balance of HoloFuel in somebody's account now. And that's super important to just keep remembering that purpose of the reserve, because the other currency now is being held in reserve for hosts, only hosts, to be able to provide services on the Holo network and then have a way to redeem out of the Holo network. So I think that's just super important to keep coming back to and clarifying the intention of reserves. So kind of back to the question, which was more about volatility or mechanisms like that. So, excess volatility, as you see it in crypto markets, that's typically, I would say, a consequence of coin supply being unconnected to a real need, an actual use. The only up or down is usually just based on investor sentiment. But with HoloFuel, once hosts are setting those redemption prices at reserves for currencies, and I'm talking about reserves that are other than hot, right? I mean, we're saying when people are putting euros into a reserve and USD into a reserve, then the price setting that they do, this is a stabilized, this is saying that the price is being stabilized by the actions of the distributed crowd of hosts. So that sort of mechanism is in and of itself the stabilizing mechanism. It's not an algorithm.
Okay, that's fantastic. Is there anything else you want to go into in that, or I've got a couple of questions, but I'm also conscious of moving us along.
No, I think we can just move on.
Okay. Just again, I think we should let's again, for anyone here asking or listening that feels like they don't have a full handle on the reserves, please get in some questions, and we'll see, because I think one of the things I've been sensing over the last couple of AMAs is that there are a lot of questions that I think either assume that the reserves don't exist, which is natural because other crypto projects have the project, they have tokens being held in different wallets and then have exchanges, right? And other services. And so the market makers or whatever else they have, and so that yeah, tokens are being distributed. And in this case, I think it still, I think like some of the questions are not quite, or we're not communicating in a way that there is a reserve that is selling HoloFuel to hosts.
Well, I think it's important to remember that, the reserves are about, the reserves are a primary way that the supply is grown and also shrunk. And I think there was some question about the shrinking supply that we might be talking about a little bit, another one of the questions, but every time that a host redeems their HoloFuel at the reserve. Now, remember that to redeem your HoloFuel at the reserve means you're getting out whatever other currency the reserve is holding.
Yep.
When that happens, the amount of HoloFuel in circulation shrinks. And I mean, think when I say in circulation, it literally means that the HoloFuel that I pay to the reserve as a host, say I'm a host, when I say, okay, I've got this 200 HoloFuel that I want to, get whatever, euro for, I'm going to transfer my 200 HoloFuel to the reserve. That pays down the credit line of the reserve. That means that they're less negative. And then I'm going down in my, my account of HoloFuel. So HoloFuel is being taken out of basically what I'd call circulating supply of HoloFuel, because my positive balance. And I think that's the fundamental place where people are not used to seeing a breathing, sort of a breathing currency, essentially, one that's moving up and down with the use of it in the community as it comes, as there's more need, because as there's more need, people, it doesn't work to just go to the exchange. The exchange can't create the HoloFuel. They don't have a credit line, right? Only the reserves have those credit lines that can actually expand the supply. At some point, some people are not going to be purchasing at the reserve because it's going to be, or at the exchange, because if a lot of people are pushing, that'll start pushing the price up, but then the price differential between the reserve and the exchange will be off, and it'll be cheaper to buy it at the reserve. So those people who need it will go to the reserve. So I think that's not, I think that it's difficult. I think seeing all of those things functioning together as part of the system is what's hard to hold in one, fell swoop, essentially.
Awesome. Okay. And well, another question that's, I guess, kind of related, but and I think it was last AMA, we were talking about HOT and how it isn't going anywhere at this stage. And so specifically, like, what does that mean for the swap period? Does it mean it's indefinite now, or just still a minimum of 6 months?
Well, it is indefinite. It is a minimum of 6 months, and it's indefinite. We're planning to use HOT as the crypto bridge into, as the bridge to crypto, essentially, from HoloFuel, for us and for our hosts to be able to exchange back out to a crypto.
Okay.
In the same way that we're going to be eventually offering a EUR and USD, as at least those are ones that we know we would like to set up reserves in those currencies for people who are going to be using HoloFuel. For anybody that wants to come into it from the crypto side, HOT will be the entry point.
Okay. So does that mean HOT will be like a reserve account? Yeah. Okay. And so that's perfect. Okay. So HOT will be a reserve account and will be the first reserve account.
Yes.
Great. And then if we, for example, if there's people want to be buying hosting in US dollars or euros or whatever in a year's time or whenever it is, that a euro account would be a separate reserve account?
There will be multiple reserves. There will be a reserve set up for each currency that we decide to.
Yep. Perfect. Okay. Super. Thank you. So then back kind of to this volatility question, how can the algorithm manage volatility by reducing supply if hot remains stuck in that 1-to-1 or connected into that 1-to-1 ratio? And kind of we talked about how HoloFuel can't shrink lower than the supply of hot. So does this include swapped hot, etc.?
Okay, so there's a lot in this.
Yep.
All mixed together. Let me try to say one thing. So the algorithms, and like I said in the last question, the algorithm's actually not trying to manage volatility by reducing supply. That's not the way that it works. The volatility is managed by the price setting by the crowd. So that's that answer set aside for now. The 1-to-1 ratio. So for the swap period, Holo, the swap period is the guaranteed 6-month swap period. Holo is guaranteeing a 1-to-1 swap rate between between HoloFuel and hot. We're not going to manage a pegged price forever. Prices may stay near each other for hot and HoloFuel, but it's not going to be something that we're managing for. That's not the point. We promised that we would do it for 6 months so that we can give anybody who purchased hot tokens the ability to swap into HoloFuel, period. So with relationship to the shrinking lower than the hot supply, I don't think I clarified my assumptions real well when I spoke on the last AMA. Because in many ways, it's not really even true, right? In mutual credit, like I was just saying, the total supply is actually always zero. And when I say, and that's what I mean by like, for every HoloFuel that's credited, you've got an equal HoloFuel account that's debited. So that's what I meant by that zero. But the thing is when I even in the last question, when I was talking about it, there's this idea that supply can grow or shrink, and that is because we really mean the circulating supply of fuel, which is the fuel that people can spend, right? So that's the total positive balance of HoloFuel, right, in people's accounts. But to kind of step back to the larger than or not larger than the supply of hot, in a very abstract way, hot represents prepaid hosting credits, and HoloFuel also represents prepaid hosting credit on the Holo network. In that sense, changing from one to the other doesn't increase or decrease the supply at that abstract level of credits of hosting, right? So in that sense, when I'm saying supply, I think that's more what investors are asking about, because they're talking about that combination. But the thing is with the reserve, when somebody puts hot into a reserve, it's being held. It's not really circulating. If you think about it, people asked last week about how are things going to be represented up on various sites that try to manage what is circulating supply of tokens. And it's like, well, I don't know. Are they going to be changing how they represent? Is CoinMarketCap going to be changing how they represent circulating supply of hot on a moment by moment basis? Because any hot that goes into the reserve technically stops circulating, and any hot that then comes out of the reserve starts circulating again. And while it's in the reserve, it's reserved. It's not circulating. And so that's really important, because I think when people are talking about the supply, they really mean the combined supply in some ways, but the combined supply of circulating. So that's what makes this very difficult to talk about. I want to say one other thing about it. Once, and maybe I kind of already did, once the other mechanisms for dynamic supply are enabled. So that means that HoloFuel is going to be able to expand and contract based on credit lines, right? Credit lines would be for, as an example, the Euro reserve or the USD reserve. Those things are going to make sure that, a reserve HoloFuel account gets debited and then a buyer's HoloFuel account gets credited. That's where that expansion contraction is happening. And I know I feel like I'm pounding on this one, but I think given the kinds of questions that are coming up, this is one of the places where there is the most confusion.
Okay, well, hopefully we've shed some light on that. in the last few minutes. I'm sure there's going to be more questions. I'm sure every time we think we're done with the HoloFuel AMAs, I think there's going to be more questions. And I think we're getting to the heart, though, that they're pointed in these areas. What's that?
We can take a break maybe and talk about a few other things that we're building.
All right. Well, what's that, Mary?
Maybe talk about some of the projects being built someday.
I know. Well, no. Well, yeah, we should have some stuff coming out on that over the next week. Fingers crossed. Okay, so next one around. Well, and on that note, for like one of the ways the ecosystem is likely to kick off, are Holochain built currencies more suitable for an ICO, other fundraising, or a functioning cryptocurrency?
Well, Holochain is basically an open source framework and network protocol for building distributed applications. So developers get to say, in some ways. It's interesting. The rules of the applications really can support fixed or dynamic supply currencies. It isn't, the way we've built HoloFuel is specific to the needs of Holo, not what everybody will need. What I will say, though, is that for other partners or other developers or people who are building new businesses out there, there are probably a lot of other businesses that are marketplaces that are asset-backed, that want an asset-backed currency to represent what it is that is the fundamental asset that they need fungibility for. And those will probably have some similarities, but not all. I don't know what those designs will look at, but if they do need something that has a breathing supply, that is distributed, and that is really optimized for mutual credit, Holochain's the way to go. Because trying to build that on something else, well, we don't know the way to do that. That's why we built Holochain in many ways.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I think just this kind of question does come up a bit as well, but just to be really clear, so it is, Holochain doesn't have a currency, and developers could build, as Mary just said, a mutual credit, potentially even fixed supply, although it's not optimized for that, and other types of currencies on Holochain. So, and
absolutely. Every currency built on Holochain is its own discrete application, has its own discrete DHT, distributed hash table. It's its own thing. And so lots of currencies can and will be built on Holochain.
And yeah, hopefully we'll be profiling some groups who are doing some pretty cool, like, early steps in this area out in the community as well in the coming weeks and months. Okay, super. So then, would any cryptocurrency that's built on Holochain, the question says created on Holo, but I'm just going to go for on Holochain, have the same speed as HoloFuel or the same transaction per second as HoloFuel?
No. Everything would be dependent on the design. I mean, there's no way to answer that. I mean, other than just saying no.
Could someone make a currency that's faster than HoloFuel?
I don't know.
Right.
This is a crazy kind of question in some ways, right? When you're building applications, you can always make things different. You can always, there are pros and cons to all of it. If you are giving up some areas of consistency, reliability, predictability, you can have gains in other areas. I mean, we know that those things are true, but you want currencies to be safe. you want them to have validity. And whatever rules you're building for your validity, however fast your application can run those rules is how fast your transactions per second will be. That's it. Now, Holochain does a lot to make the transactions, run efficiently. And even some of the things that we've been working on recently for for Holochain are going to kind of give us that bump we really want to see in our transaction speeds. But because we're getting, never mind, I'm going off into other development land. I don't want to do that. I want to stay on HoloFuel. But yeah, it really just depends. It depends on the app. You have a certain amount of what comes out of the box with Holochain, and then everything else is dependent on the rules and the validations and what you make your app do to how fast you can go. I mean,
Right. Okay. So in terms of currencies people might be designing, could we be building proof of type currencies that are common in the cryptocurrency world, like proof of attention, proof of online, etc.? Are they possible to build in the Holochain environment?
well, yeah, certainly. I mean, it really, if you think about it, I think Arthur talks about currencies more in terms of flow, right? I mean, if you've watched some of his videos where he gets down to the essence of currents, it's currents that you can see. He even respells it for everybody so they can kind of get the roots of the words there. It's about value moving around, and it's not just monetary, right? It's a huge range of flows, not just of economic activity or material energy, but really anything that a community can hold and value, or whether that's care, whether that's art, whether food appreciation, all of those things. So, I mean, if you think about it, reputation's just an extension of that. It's and proof of attention, but proof of your reputation is a similar kind of thing. And we talk about it a lot with reputation, because I think that one's a visible currency that we see on tons of other apps, and sometimes we believe it and sometimes we don't believe it. That's part of the problem with some of the centralized technologies, right? Because you have ratings, you have 5-star ratings, you have this, you have that, and then you're like, but how do I know those people are real, and how do I know that they really did that? And I can't see how that happened or where it came to be, where it's from. So even inside of the Holo hosting platform, we're building a reputation, like well, it is basically a reputation type of application. It's and I mean, we're not calling it a currency per se, but kind of it's an attestations. It's basically saying that you can provide a verifiable claim for somebody. And if you think about those things, when people collect a series of verifiable claims that this is true about this person and this is true about this person, they're building reputation, and that is a form of currency because that has value, and it's being provided inside of a flow because somebody else can actually do that attestation for you, and say these things. So whether that, like, we see this in the traditional world as KYC, but really, how many people can validate you? What was that app way back when? It was before Airbnb. It was the sharing. Oh, I'm terrible with names of things, but it was where you could stay with people, not house sitting. You were just crashing.
Couch surfing.
Couch surfing, that one. Thank you. One of the, I remember when that first came out. One of the big ways to get validation was to have people validate you. Who are you? How many people in your community will say, dude, she's a good person? It's okay if she comes and crashes on your couch. It won't, you're gonna wake up and you'll be safe the next morning. But that's what that was about, and that was a similar type of thing, right? Those were attestations that people were giving you, and so these are a form, so when we talk about a currency being an application, a set of rules, that's what we mean. HoloFuel is a set of rules that has a balance that goes up and down in a particular way, right? It follows a mutual credit pattern. But verifiable claims is another type of application that has flows that follows a different set of patterns that are basically about reputation.
Super.
What's next?
I'm just giving everyone a second to catch up. All right. So I'm going to read this one. I'm not processing fully, but so could a cryptocurrency be created on Holochain without using Holo hosting or cloning HoloFuel? Or is every crypto that can be built on Holochain required to be a clone of HoloFuel? Okay.
Well, a currency can be created on Holochain that is not hosted, nor related at all in design to HoloFuel. I expect a lot of people to do this in ways we can't even imagine. So yes. And really, currencies can be just on Holochain. Nobody has to host it.
Yes. Great. I think that great. I think that's cleared. Hopefully that should clear it up for people, but I'm sure we'll still get this question again. Just before we move into the switch gears a little bit into application developers, I think you just touched on something, Mary, in the previous answer that I think is, I want to just put a placeholder and for us, because I think it's going to be a fundamental shift in how people interact with hApps, or what we're going to call web apps in the future. When you described what was happening in those early days of couch surfing, and you would have this sort of attestation, this collective, in a way, it's a little bit of microtrust. A few people can validate this person, and you could build a network around it. And then what we saw is the really powerful web apps sort of took that concept, but stripped a little bit of the humanity out of it and said, well, you can kind of do things like ratings or reputation systems. And it kind of, but by taking out the real human physical element that couch surfing had, it was a really organic early days where the technology couldn't do most things. So you really actually had to have people, who'd stayed on that couch and really got to know you a little bit, validate in a particular way. And so I think one of the things I'm really excited about is what this idea of microtrust does to applications when you're scaling horizontally almost all these tiny microtrust networks and connecting them, rather than bridging in the way that we have into this environment. Says, well, okay, there's one reputation system, and then in the end it's a game, and you game the reputation system and you lose the microtrust element. It doesn't matter if you know the person next door in Airbnb or all these kind of places. What you need to do is have a good score according to their particular algorithm, which is applied globally. So I'm really looking forward to this pendulum swing and seeing what's possible with Holochain apps as they're building on this microtrust concept.
Right. I mean, the fundamental, it's interesting. You brought up a lot of different points in that comment, and I think there's two that I want to kind of tease out a little bit. One is the gaming, right? And where we know, when we see that as in e-commerce, when things are rated, and who trusts the ratings, right? I mean, because they've tried to make it better, like on Amazon, right? You have all these ratings, but for the longest time you'd see these things with thousands of ratings, all 5 stars, this, that, and the other. And then they had to start going, oh, now they're verified purchase ratings. And they keep having to like adjust it because people are gaming it because they don't know who's doing, or because they don't, there's nothing at risk for the person putting the rating, is kind of really what's there. And that person isn't a real person. They're just sort of a click number sort of thing. And that in part is because you're either trusting Amazon or you're not, right? And the thing is you trust some of these companies that build these apps more than you trust others. Like maybe you trust that Airbnb designed their ratings correctly, or maybe you just think that everybody who bothers with a rating there always gives a good one. I don't know. But I know for me, I read the reviews. I don't just look at the ratings because I don't trust the way that ratings have us do things, but in terms of the psychology of it in a way, right? And some of this is never going to go away. We're still designing applications. We're still designing all of these things. Human beings, I mean, when I say we, not Holochain, we as human beings, we're faulty as human beings. And all of it, like those of us involved in software development, we're going to build things that aren't perfect in the future over and over and over. That's just the way it goes. This is what it's like to be human. But anyway, that means that these rating systems will not always be perfect, which is why people then game them, which is why you see the changes. But when you get down to something like a rating system that's also got a review, if you read the reviews, you can kind of tell, well, is that a bot or is that a real person writing this? Because that's something that a human being generates, not just a number. So that is that's powerful, and I think part of this trust thing that you were pointing out is that there is this way that there's something at stake when you as an individual are signing with your private keys all of these transactions, because you're signing an attestation. That's a promise, and if you get a bad reputation for giving bad attestations, well, then you get removed from that sort of thing, because that's kind of, it's defeating the purpose of it being meaningful.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. We've got 9 minutes left, so I think we'll rattle through 3 or 4 questions. So one, can a app developer build part application on Holochain, Substrate, Ethereum, etc.? And if yes, how would HoloFuel flow through this mesh of networks for achieving the dual purpose of the objective of the application, as well as the proliferation of HoloFuel as a currency of choice?
Well, in some ways, it's probably a much better question for Arthur than for me at this point. But I mean, I can say a few things about it. Yes, we're absolutely architecting Holochain. Yeah, actually, Holo to work with site, both. Holochain is being architected to work with side chains. Okay, so that's actually one of the things that we have in our plan, our release plans. And Holo in particular, because HoloFuel is part of Holo's set of applications, is also inherently being built to be interoperable and used with and by other applications. So you know, the app has a web UI, so conceivably it can. My point in that is that you can write web front ends that have an API connection that are using the sort of the DNA of HoloFuel. You can use the DNA to connect into other apps, and then you can have it display on your app or inside your app. I think we talked about this in one of the AMAs. I mean, we talked about being able to use an in-app currency, using HoloFuel as an in-app currency in a game or other things like that. So certainly that is part of the intent. The currency of choice is the currency that people think is valuable, right? And the currency that people like the features of. And people like different features for different currencies for different reasons. And one of the things is that we're saying that HoloFuel has inherent value because it's connected to real assets and things of need, and that connection actually starts to form a bit of like a level of stability for the currency. And those things are important to people, because one of the things you hear people get frustrated with, and maybe it's not the people who are currently in the crypto space in droves right now, because those are early people who came in early, or somewhat early, maybe in the middle times of crypto. So they tended to be early adopters. They wanted to be into the innovation of something and take the chances with it, and they were okay with all the volatility of it. But some of the people who haven't moved into crypto for those reasons may be interested in some of the things. And they have, you've seen it with people, you see certain people who will use crypto only if it's a like a tethered type of, you know, or a, it just went blank on the word.
I can't even jump in with this one.
Yeah, you could, but if you knew what was in my brain instead of what I sorry.
I knew you'd been couch surfing, but I'm not sure where you are now.
All right. I think I answered the vast majority of the question in there. Yes.
I agree. Okay, so yeah, great question. Thank you. Okay, so and apart from KYC, what is in place to protect end users for crypto created on a Holochain? Traditional crypto relies on the block explorer and the ability to audit addresses. What can a holo crypto, like HoloFuel, etc., do to keep everyone honest?
Well, I think that when we talked last time about the Explorer concept, yes, there's going to be Explorers built for Holochain as well, for HoloFuel as well. It's really interesting though. There's what we are doing and then what other people might do with currencies. And I'm not sure if this question was about HoloFuel or if it was about other people building currencies using Holochain. So what I can say is that we can suggest some best practices and designs to others building. But at the end of the day, they get to create what they want. Specific to HoloFuel, we have several different types of criteria. And I know they said other than KYC, KYC is an important part of it, right? Because we're bridging between the crypto world and the, you know, and distributed application world, really, to the centralized world. And so for us, having things like KYC is what has us be able to be regulated, which is important for Holo and what Holo is doing in particular. Not Holochain. Holochain is not part of that. Holochain is not regulated. Holochain is the open source project and it's the foundations. So anyway, HoloFuel related to Holo, we do have KYC. Those go from basic email up to full third-party, you know, multimodality type things of verification. But there's no hidden transactions. There's no anonymous accounts. That's part of the protection. There's a couple of other things that are built in terms of limitations that might be geographic or jurisdictional things, because we're based in Gibraltar. So this gets back to the regulation and sort of what guidelines we have to meet as a company. And there are some, right? So that's going to be there as well in terms of the sanctions lists and stuff like that. That still applies just like it does with any other type of transaction. But I think basically all accounts being visible to others on the DHT. I mean, the transparency is part of it. Just like you have transparency with other crypto, you're going to have transparency with HoloFuel. Now, it may not, that's to the people who already have access to the DHT. So it's sort of like private, public, right? It's a mixture because it's not just public to anybody necessarily. You have that access through your account, through your own keys. You're muted.
I know I am super okay. I think we're at time. There is a little bit on the I think we're at time. Let's close. So firstly, just thank you, Mary, for those responses. Thank you for the third HoloFuel AMA. For everyone, thank you for your ongoing support and questions about HoloFuel, and to all of you who've provided feedback. And a couple of times in this AMA, I paused and asked, or encouraged people to ask more questions in this particular area. My feeling is we're getting really close to some clarity that has been wanted. And so it's very exciting. And please, if you don't quite have that yet, especially around reserves, around currencies as applications, and as around the countersigned transactions, asynchronous transactions as a design choice and what's possible there between people, between agents, and into centralized organizations, people to organizations, etc. Those kind of questions, please reflect and keep them coming. We really, really value that.
And
Yep.
that, can I add something to what you're saying, David, for a second?
Yeah, please.
We'll start talking, like we focused these last 3 MAs on HoloFuel because HoloFuel was being released. People were asking a lot of questions. We were starting to test it with more and more people. But there are a ton of different aspects, features, parts of the platform coming out. Each of those also bring up critical parts of the design.
Yeah.
And some of those things that you're talking about. And we will want to get into those as we're releasing them so that we can let people know what it is that you're seeing, why is it working the way that it's working, and what is different about it as it comes out. So I'm just looking forward to shifting gears into some of that as we do those releases.
Yeah, likewise. Well, yeah, I mean, I was going to close with, I'm looking forward to hearing updates of the testing progress in the coming week and and hearing, as shifting gears and hearing more about Holochain, what's possible, hosted hApps, what's happening with Holo, networking, etc. So yeah, really, really looking forward to some of the AMAs in the coming couple of months. For those of you who want to get involved in terms of events, holo.host/events is where you can go, as well as forum.holochain.org /C/events. I think it's going to be posted in the chat here. We're having meetups, where there's a developer camp that I talked about in introduction, virtual hackathons, and there's a lot of actually community activity that you're not seeing in traditional crypto community, which is a lot is happening on Telegram. We're talking about people talking about reputation, IoT, other themes of Holochain, thinking about and actually building a whole bunch of social relationships and social cohesion and getting to know each other. So some really great stuff going on there. Please get more involved by going to the forum.holochain.org, joining our social channels and starting to chat, joining up a virtual hackathon, and most importantly, really start scoping out and beginning to build your app now, as it is the time. Thank you. That was AMA 41. Mary Camacho, thank you so much. David Atkinson, and we will see you in the coming weeks.
Bye, everybody.